that, although that's all why you're here, is to talk to each other. We also have Project Forge live streaming the event, so if you don't want to be in the live stream, then sit further back from Jack, who is very kindly live streaming it for us as well. So it's mainly just the speakers that he takes. That's kind of the big shots that he takes. I'll make a start with you. So as I said, Nina can't come, so she apologises for that. She was actually quite gutted. She was looking very much forward to being able to do. This is just a quick rundown of what we're looking at doing. So I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to what we at SCVO call digital evolution. You will hear Steve talking about digital transformation, but essentially these are the same things. We were just kind of having a chat about that. We're trying to use words that people understand and people know, so it's us trying to create a common language and how do we say it, how do we sell it. I'll give you just a bit of chat about our own digital journey within our digital team. People think that because I work in a digital team that I know how to fix computers, that I can sort their printer, that I can do all kinds of techie stuff that for me is, I don't have a clue how to do that. I would phone my RT department. So there's just a bit of that, what does that actually mean? Then as we said, Steve Plummer from After Digital is going to talk about digital transformation and a lot of the work that they've been doing with third sector organisations. We'll have a bit of a comfort break, time dependent. I will say that these times have already gone out the window, so it'll be fine. Then we've got Ross McCulloch, who's the CEO and founder of Third Sector Labs. Some of you might know Ross already. Do most of you know Ross? Have you heard of Ross? Some nods, definitely. Ross gets about, he's a busy man. Him and his wife are very busy people. So he's got a kind of a presentation on 13 questions to ask if you're thinking about digital evolution and using digital technology to make changes within your workplace. What we've got, which is something new for us that I'm likely to try, is we've got something called a digital checkup. So this is around evolution and maturity. And again, you'll hear Steve talking about this as well. This is me using you guys as guinea pigs to test something. We have this new tool that we've been devising and that's out there and it's still in beta. So I've got a link for us to give it a shot, to get your feedback, to see what you think. And it's about trying to help third sector organisations just have a starting point to assess, well, what is the area that we're lacking in? Is it everything? Is it leadership? Is it cyber? You know, where are our major gaps? So it's actually that's there to kind of give us a bit more information, to try and benchmark against other third sector organisations, and it's to start discussions within organisations. And again, this is something that you'll hear Steve talk about. That's a lot of the work that they do is around digital maturity and using a model and a tool to help start that, right, well, where do we start? Because I think for a lot of third sector organisations, that's the thing, is like, right, we know we need to do this, but we're not quite sure how, and we don't actually know where to start with this. So it's to help just have that initial, right, let's have a starting point. And then we've got the bit about doing a future perspective. So a lot of within our team, we're lucky enough to have developers, and they work in sprints. They work in an agile way, so they use a lot of agile methods. They use a lot of agile ideas. And as a part of the team, we've taken some of those principles on board, and we've started to do things called retrospectives and future perspectives. And that is sitting down and looking at what we're currently doing really good, at going, come on, we can make this work. Let's give this a shot. Let's see what we can do. But again, it's should we, just because we can, should we? Or is it a waste of time? Should we concentrate more on the what's kind of working or what's really working? And the future perspective part of that is thinking, okay, we know what's working. How are we going to make it better? How do we increase reach? How do we increase capacity? How do we network better? So it's just thinking about what the future holding and where we're going. So we can do a bit on that as well. And then if you want, I mean, Steve said that he's quite happy to take questions after his presentation. Ross is always happy to take questions as well. So again, that's your opportunity to ask our experts for the day. Ross will be, no, Steve's going, oh, I'm not an expert. Ross will be like that, don't call me an expert. So just to ask them questions. They might be able to answer them, they might not, but I'm sure between the two of them, they will know somebody who can. So please do make use of them today whilst they're here. I also was saying, because I'm quite short, I quite like having a podium. It's quite nice. Makes me feel important. That's an insight. Sorry, you don't need to know that about me. That's a bit of insight into myself. Just with us within the digital team, as I say, my manager Beth is just back from maternity leave. We were saying that sometimes we've struggled to describe what we do for a job, because people hear that word, certainly within my experience, digital, and they think it's tech. They think I mean that I know how to fix the computers. But for us, very much, it's about using the things that are out there to make life easier for ourselves. So it's a lot about humans, it's about people, it's about interaction. And within our organisation, I think I've been in post for, it's about 2 and a bit years now, I'm not quite, I kind of get a bit hazy, but it's about 2 years. And we use a lot of these tools now in our everyday that 2 years ago, we were struggling or they didn't even exist. So we use phrases like, I'll slack you that. We'll use things like I'll monzo you the money. We talk about zooming each other or appearing in with each other. Check my workflow. There's lots of these things that have now become part of our everyday vocabulary that my then director, I sent him a tweet and it was blank, there was nothing in it, which he thought was hilarious. And I had to email him to say, I think I've sent you a blank tweet, and then he phoned me to say, yes, you have, that's absolutely hilarious, and I've retweeted it to my 1,000 followers. So it was that, this is how we speak to a lot of technology that's out there, and how my everyday has changed. Previous posts, I would wake up, and my colleague Jo and I have got this, is it Momentum plugin? It'll give me my list of things to do. And this is all before I've even opened an email. Inbox is actually quite vastly reduced, happens somewhere else. So I don't have 15 emails about the photocopier's not working, or when the bins are being collected, or a light bulb needs changed, or somebody's gone on annual leave. It's all so it's not there. That's our job, so we're supposed to be able to do these things. We're given here talking about, so this, and operate more effectively, getting rid of people, getting rid of jobs, making everything online to take away from that frontline facing staff. It's about 2009 and we're in 2018. So it's that idea that I think sometimes we're playing catch up. It's like, right, let's get out there, let's do this. What are we doing? And as I said, there's no strategy. Everything that they do, 2017, the Text Trust, they've just produced that. So these are from the resistance of that of the UK. We've kind of realised is that we understand that for some people and some charities, written another. We don't talk about it being a money or a favor or out there to your advantage and understanding what that can mean and what that can look like. So what huge expectation, and there's a huge drive already that it's going to be changed. And a land more deep street soccer signs up for information about how many people are there, what they're doing, where they're from, what issues they've got. And that's to me why funders hear buzzwords like that and then they jump on the bandwagon. So it's for us to say, but yeah, a lot of the work that we've been doing, we've done our senior leaders program. There's a lot of research out there that this is the case, that our senior leaders are sitting there going, we don't need to do this. Our boards are made up of individuals resistant to digital. My own digital skills, so there's no weight behind it, but definitely it's everybody's responsibility. There's only 4 questions, so it's next question. Do you need to recruit new trustees as an organisation? Do you think that your trustees, do you know who your board are? Do you know who your trustees are? Do you know what your board's made up of? Do you think that they are of an ability? Oh, is it not coming up? That's a key question. Damn it. Let me go back. That question come back up again? I might just do a show of hands. Sometimes the tech doesn't work. Sometimes you have to. I know. Sometimes you always have to have a backup, let's put it that way. Try one more time. Let me see if I can refresh it. That might just kick us out completely. Oh no, I never pressed it. We might be overstretching the Wi-Fi, which might be the thing. We're asking it to do too much.
The question did come up and I've answered it.
I think that was just as I was pressing refresh. Hey, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, so a bigger result that yes, think that we need to recruit new trustees. With those of you that answered yes there, what's your reason behind that? What's your reasons for the yes? Yep, so actually it's because of this current situation that you're in that there's an overall change process happening, yeah? Somebody else? Did somebody else say, yeah? Okay.
And nobody has any particular digital skills
Mm.
or more, so
To kind of champion it and talk about it, yeah? Absolutely. See, that's something that we hear quite a lot, is that that's actually the case, is about the makeup of boards, what a traditional board looks like and how that in itself is changing to what we're kind of used to seeing. Final question, fingers crossed. I'll be more patient this time. I think that's maybe my trouble, because I'm used to a bit faster. Hold my breath. Hope it works. Good, thanks. So this was a question that, this has actually come from Nina, I think, where what Nina talked about was that she talked about as an organisation, as chief exec of a CAS, Nina was like, we're going to be brave, come on, we're going to do this, we're going to make the changes. And just to kind of give you a bit of background, Nina had gone in our senior leaders programme with the idea that what they needed was a new website. And over the course of the kind of the 6 months of the programme, she actually turned around and said, no, the website is just one of the things, that's like the end product. What we need is to digitize new processes, we need to embed it in our everyday practice, we need to upskill staff, we need to think about new trustees. So it became this much bigger, all-encompassing journey for them as an organisation. And this is one of the things that Nina talks about, is that being brave. Because it is a big step, it's change, it's a big step. There are staff that maybe won't go with that and maybe will leave the organisation, and they've probably been there for quite some time, but they're like, no, this is not for me anymore. So it is that about being brave and getting out there and taking that risk. Most of you are ready for it. There's one that's like, no, we're not ready at all. That's quite interesting. I'm not going to make that person say who that is. But that's quite interesting that most of you are, as organisations, your senior leaders are ready for it. Thank you very much. Just minimise that just now. Find my mouse again. The other thing that I mentioned and that we talk about as well is digital maturity. And the stats on this are that the sector the maturity index is half that of the UK average. So it's half what it kind of should be within the digital maturity. When we're talking about digital maturity, this is what we're talking about. So that's a leadership culture that is able to adapt and evolve to the opportunities and challenges of a changing environment. So digital is in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be digital, but generally we're talking about an organisation that's able to adapt, it's able to change, it's flexible, it's able to take on new things, and digital is a huge part of that. So is your organisation digitally mature? Is it able to do that? And again, my colleague Kyle, as I said, he's a year on from Beth's original blog about all of this. He has wrote, he starts it really well, it's on the SCVO website, I think it went live yesterday. And what he starts off by saying that if the Osbornes taught us anything, age isn't a sign of maturity. It's actually about knowing your skills, your abilities, what you can do, where you can go, and the ability to kind of change and take on new things. And that's really a lot about what digital maturity is and what we're asking. So in more detail, digital maturity is about taking advantage of things that are out there. Understanding audiences and changing our requirements. So that's about going out and doing that whole systems approach to service design, starting with the people who we serve instead of starting at the top. So that's going to the people that we work with and that we work for and saying, what do you want? What does the service look like for you? And then us using the tools that are out there to help it fit them, help the organisation be more fit for purpose. As opposed to starting at the top and starting with a funder. The funder wants this. How do we make our service fit what the funder wants? It's the other way around. And using the data to make evidence-based strategic decisions. Again, I've worked in the third sector for about 25 years odd, and a lot of that time has been, what can we do now? What do we think that we want? Where's the money? So it's like chasing the pots of money as opposed to actually going, well, what's the need? Where's the gap? What's missing? And there's been a lot of duplication and repetition because of that. And organisations that I've worked with, we've just been quicker at getting to that pot than other organisations. So this is actually looking at, well, what's the evidence for you to set up that new project? What's the evidence for doing that? So actually using the data that we've got. And as organisations, I'm sure we've got a lot of data. We've got a lot of information, either in filing cabinets or in the cloud or somewhere, that we've got all of this information. because funders ask us to keep it and collect it, but there's no real purpose behind it because they don't necessarily ask for it all. So it's actually using what we've got and thinking about how we could use it a lot more strategically. Being able to adapt to changes in legislation and in user needs, and communicate effectively with internal and external audiences. So that's our stakeholders, being able to organise and do things and work with them and listen to people. And being confident and resilient against online threats, and again, that's our cyber resilience. And this is all about people. This is about us looking at how can we work better? What can we do to make a better service? What are the needs? How can we make it easier for staff? How can we use digital tech to increase capacity and reduce the administration? Again, in that 25 years, and I still hear it now, I was a frontline support worker for a lot of those years, and I would be one of the first ones to say, as Beth and Joe will attest, my administrational skills are quite poor. And one of the things that I would always do is as I got yet another form that I had to fill out for yet another funder, I am not an administrator, I am a support worker. Why am I filling this out? And my time would shift from doing frontline support work to filling out admin. And that became a kind of a cry for a lot of support workers, and it still is today. Whereas we can be using this digital technology to free up time and free up frontline workers' time to work more, to do a lot more with the people that we're supposed to work with. So part of that is, this is the next bit that we're going to go, and I'm going to get you back on your phones. This bit may not work at all because it's a survey gizmo. Not because survey gizmo doesn't work, but because you're all going to be online answering questions all at once, and the Wi-Fi might not be able to cope with it, so we'll see how we get on. With our digital checkup tool, we've got these main things that we cover. So there's a bit about leadership and culture and skills. There's thinking about tools and equipment within your organisation. Content, marketing and data, so how you're using that, what are you doing anything at all? And then thinking about cyber resilience and online threats, how well you're protected about that, or if you're thinking about it, or where you've got to with that. So if I can ask you, hopefully, to type this in to your browsers. I'm hoping it's going to work. So it's tinyurl.com / that's a / isn't it? That's not a backslash. Y7E32NZ4. And hopefully you should have a survey that says SCO, yes, thank you, nods, thanks very much. Have we all got it? Let me bring it up so I can. Hopefully, you should have something that looks like that. Okay. If you can start answering the questions, that would be great. So we'll ask you things. I'm not going to answer it because I'll skew the results. I probably can't. We can probably take them away. Could it? I don't know. I'm looking at Joe for confirmation about whether I'll not fill out. So I'll ask you, there's a leadership and culture, and it asks you questions. What I would say as well is don't think too hard about the questions. Don't overanalyze them, just think in your head, okay, that's yes, no, maybe, not sure about that. Yes, we've got that, no, we haven't. Because sometimes with surveys, when we spend time overanalyzing it, we're like, oh, I don't actually know what the answer is. Sure, I can bring it back up. Might do that in the break, just to check, see if that works. Maybe we should get another cup of tea whilst you're doing this to pass the time. Yeah, we should be able to do that, right? If let's do it in this first. Yeah, and I have to do report.
So just like the word cloud type.
Yeah, the right one. Why doesn't it ever remember who I am? Is that the American one? No, that's the right one.
No, that's fine. A different browser.
Ah, it's kept me logged in. That's good. So, SCVO, now I found it. It's not what I thought it was called.
It might just be under the digital
Team.
Digital maturity model.
It's called SCVO Digital Maturity Model, but it's never in the right place. It's never where I think it is.
Yeah, search for it. Just go with
Let's see what happens. This happened the other day when I was trying to find it.
looked at this one too much. So,
It wasn't what I thought it was called. And I think it's 2000.
this is probably in order of what's been used.
Let me, hang on, I'm going to SCVO digital checkup. Let's see if that we can find it that way. Oh, where's my mouse? Oh, come on. I remember finding it. Are you answering the questions okay? Wi-Fi's holding up? How are you finding the questions? Some people felt the questions were pigeonholing them, man, putting them in a box. Whereas other folk were like, oh, but these are really useful to start a conversation with my senior leaders about why this is important. If you've given it, then we'll if you've managed to give it a go, we'll take a really quick break before we bring Steve on. if that's okay. So grab yourself another cup of tea and coffee. There is a loo. I was going to do that door, but that door only works in a fob, so you'll get stuck. Use this door here. There's a loo out there if you want to use the loo. If you would like to grab yourself a quick tea or coffee or use the loo before we bring Steve on, that'll be great. So it's not an official break, it's just a quick move about, because I've talked at you for quite some time and you've done 2 techie things. Found it, Joe, found it. I've got it. I just found it. But Joe, come here. Do I just press create report?
Yeah,
When
you
everybody's
just want
finished.
kind of more or less standard one, unless the word cloud is going to be a pain in the butt.
able to bring up the Survey Gizmo report so you can see the results with some of the other people who have tested it already, so you should be able to give you a picture of the people in the room, where your organisations are sitting and what you're doing, and you will have been emailed by the magic of Survey Gizmo results if you put your email address in, and that will kind of give you some information that you can do. Hopefully afterwards, after our two speakers have done, we'll do a bit of work around that, thinking about where your particular areas within your organisation, what you could do moving forward, that future perspective bit, so we'll get a little bit of that done as well. That's really my kind of chat over, so thank you very much for listening. We will take a little bit more of that forward, so it was to give you a general broad overview of what we're talking about when we're talking about digital technology and changing the way that we work. It's out there, it's happening. It looks today, from what you were saying with your reflective questions, that most of you, if not all of you in the organisations, are ready and willing to embrace it and probably have started to, so that's great news for us. Even doing this 6 months ago, we were still, the change is happening and it's happening fast. It's definitely moving on, which is great for us to be able to see that. Ideally, really within our department at SCVO, I shouldn't maybe say this while it's being live streamed, but theoretically we should be redundant in that over a period of time, because we are digital people, so therefore you shouldn't need us after a while. Keep banging the mic as well, sorry Jack. So that's part of it as well, that we make ourselves redundant by that. So thank you very much. I'll bring on Steve, I'll get his presentation up and give you that chance as well. Thank you.
So Maddie's busy working the technology. So it looks like I might have a little bit of time towards the end. My presentation was tasked at 20 minutes, which is quite a task for me. I tend to witter on. But what I thought was, whilst I'm going through what I've pulled together, if you wanted to have think about any kind of questions or any kind of key areas that you guys are facing as organisations, happy to kind of lead that conversation. That tends to be where we start once we're starting to work with a client anyway. And as we've got a bit of time, I'm here, so use and abuse as you feel free.
It just takes a little
It's a bit of a lag.
chat to each other.
Okay. So just picking up on what Maddie was saying, so we started doing digital transformation projects, as it was badged then, about 3 years ago. We did our first one for EDF Energy, way back in the day. We spent 6 weeks on site. We produced something in the region of about 90 pages of reports with a whole bunch of recommendations. Out of those recommendations, they took that to the board. The board, as only a big utility could, funded quite a large amount of money to then go away and roll it out. And that was the first one we did 3 years ago. Between then and probably the end of 2016, we maybe did another 3 or 4, so not very many at all. Last year, we did something in the region of 9 projects, and this year we're forecasting probably to at least the same again, if not a dozen. And we think as a smallish company, we can probably manage 1 a month, the 2 consultants that we have working, myself and Kat. So it's definitely picking up. And I was saying to David and Maddie, we're actually starting to get a lot more inquiries now from the third sector, and a lot more just conversations from the third sector, asking great questions and being kind of ready to get involved in this. So I was asked to look at changing the way we work, and actually I think it's bigger and broader than that. I think it's actually about changing the way we live. And for all of you that have young members of staff, you'll know already the impact that having a digitally native member of staff in the workplace, the impact that that's having, particularly in older members of staff who are having to manage them. It's a very, very different approach that you need to take. They've got a very, very different set of skills. Some of them are great, some of them maybe not so much. And so it's impacting right across the board. So I've touched a little bit on why I'm here. So I am old enough to have been in digital since pretty much the inception of what was the design web back in '97. My very first site was a Flash 1 website that was absolutely beautiful, but completely useless. It did absolutely nothing, but it looked great. And it was only really recently, the last maybe 7 or 8 years, that we've really got into the understanding that it's what the user does and how we interact with the user that is really central to how you should be using a website. We've done multiple digital transformations. They've ranged from big PLCs like EDF through to smaller university. Currently we're working with Turning Point Scotland, and we've just signed up a very small charity down in Newcastle called the Artists Network, and we're doing their first kick-off session on the 20th. So everything from literally a 6-man band charity right the way through to EDF Energy with 15,000 people and all points in between. Our focus very much is on people and the aspect of the business and the organizational change. I was saying to Deb, for me, digital transformation or digital evolution actually has got very little, if anything, to do with the technology and with the digital platforms that are going to get brought to bear, and almost everything to do with the people that are actually going to need to deliver it. And fundamentally, it's just a business change, and business has been doing it and organizations have been doing it for long and weary, and we'll touch on that in a minute or two. Over the years, we've managed to get a fully refined methodology, and I raise that because a lot of the questions that we face when we first start working with people is how. We know we need to do this, we know kind of what we need to do, we don't really know how to do it. And having a kind of confirmed, tried and tested methodology to take you from where you are to where you need to be really helps to take some of the fear out of the process. And the best bit is, because we've been doing this for a long time, we've got proven impact. So again, it's about, we're not just going to come in and give you a report and then disappear. And I think this is really important, whether it's us or whomsoever you're working with, is to try and understand how you're going to measure the outcome of the project or projects, because there's usually more than one. And how do you measure that, and how do you then benchmark that against what you need to do? Because it is an evolution. This isn't a start and stop, it's a start and keep going kind of process. Technology is moving ever faster, so you're going to have to evolve all the time. There is no end game in sight for this, I'm afraid, which in and of itself is quite scary. So, I'm going to look at the technology versus human part. We're going to look at some of the lessons that we've learned over the last 3 years working with clients, and they're quite interesting, and that may end up, as we've got a bit more time, there's maybe some conversation that we can have around that. I've drawn up a list of 3 slides of things that you can do, 4 quick things, 9 questions you need to be asking your organisation, and 7 things that you should be asking yourselves. We've already touched on digital maturity and why it matters. I'll talk to you about our flavour of digital maturity. There are many flavours. It doesn't really matter which one, as long as you use the same one throughout the process so that you're consistently benchmarking. And then I'll pick up a little bit towards the end on what it looks like for the future. And I think in the third sector it's really interesting. There's some really interesting challenges, certainly that have come out from our work with Turning Point Scotland around what the future looks like for young people and some of the new dynamics that are coming into some of the support services that you might need to offer. So, technology changes everything, always. Since we climbed down from the trees, technology has had a massive impact on human beings, whether it's been fire, or the wheel, or Stone Age, or Bronze Age tools, or Iron Age tools, or the print and press, or steam engines, or electricity, telephones, right through to robots. Over the eons that we've been working, technology has had a massive impact, to the point where they've actually named ages after them: the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Revolution, etc. And we're now, I think, going through the digital revolution, and that's something that has been widely talked about. So you're not alone, and everybody that we work with is trying to go through the same thing. It's also quite a scary place. Human beings don't like change, by and large. Some people do, but most people find it quite a scary prospect. And the thing that we're finding is it's not so much the change that's the issue, it's the speed of change and the fact that people can't see an end to it that actually is the scary thing. There's also a huge misunderstanding that digital change is going to result in unemployment or people losing jobs or being made redundant. And Maddie picked up on that earlier as well. And I would say the vast majority of conversations that we have with our clients is actually, it's not about using technology to replace people. It's using technology, and digital technologies in particular, to replace a lot of the administrative workload to enable people to do what humans do best, which is interact with other human beings in some way, shape or form. And particularly in the third sector, where you're all people focused, that is a real area of exploration that we look at. I love this quote. I don't know if anybody knows Seth Godin. I follow Seth. He's online. He's a great kind of philosophical thinker. And he did a piece a little while ago about the inception of technology and this whole idea about humans being replaced by technology and by robots. One of the key lines was, and this is true for yourselves, but also for your organizations and for your staff, is how can I become so resilient, so human, and such a linchpin that shifts in technology won't be able to catch up. It's always been important, but now it's really, really urgent that you try and figure that out. So what are the key things, and this is a question that we ask whenever we're doing workshops or interviewing people or even just doing initial kickoff sessions, what are the key things that you as human beings in this organization can do that no machine can, that no technology can? Because that's the thing that is going to keep you in your job and keep your organization successful and keep you at the head of the game. And if you look at that and answer that question, and it's quite a deep question that you need to kind of look at yourself. And it may be that you're saying, well, so we did some work recently with a client who had a big admin department. And when we looked at their workflow, 70-ish% of their time was spent data entering. Now we can automate all of that over the time. So what do we do with those people? Well, it's not about saying that's great, thanks, we're going to save loads and loads of money. It's actually about taking that intrinsic knowledge of the organization, that experience and skills, and using that to better interact either in the organization or out of the organization with the customers. Because you can't replace that experience and expertise with a bit of technology. You just can't. So how do you free up their time to get them to deliver better customer service? And we then, as part of our roadmap, basically showed the organization how to do that, how to map their data, how to bring all of their data sets together to allow the automation to progress, and then upskill their admins to be more customer focused and more customer centered. So it wasn't about laying them off, it was about using their core skills better to better drive the organization through. So, this is another key part of what we talk about. A lot of people are scared of technology, but actually, when you look at technology, it depends on your mindset. You can either look upon it as a threat, or you can look upon it as an opportunity. So, if you remember when Uber launched in London, there was a squeal and an outcry from the black cabs because they felt that they were going to have all of their business taken off. And they then banded together and created their own Uber app. I can't remember what it's called now, I think it's come Get Hailed, I think it was. And all of a sudden, instead of looking at it as a threat, they just embraced the opportunity that Uber gave them and just provided a service very similar to it to allow you to hail a black cab in London, and that's now going viral. But the difference is, with black cabs, there's a huge asset base there. Uber is the biggest taxi company in the world. They don't actually own a single car. So it's a really interesting business model. Same with Airbnb. I can't remember the exact numbers, but Airbnb has more assets than all of the main hotel chains put together in the world. And they don't actually own any of them, but they have access to them. So it's about thinking about your business models and understanding where technology potentially can leverage access. And then, of course, we all know Kodak, who decided that digital cameras were never, ever, ever going to take off, and film was a great thing. And they went down the Swanee very, very quickly as a result of that. And now digital cameras are everywhere. You've all got one in your pocket if you've got a smartphone. So trying again to thinking about how your mental view of the world needs to change. And that's a cultural thing, which we'll really come into. Okay, so lessons that I've learned and that we've learned working with them. So on the left is a lot of the areas that we look at from a tech point of view. The main one, automation. So technology now is able to automate an awful lot of your workload. It then improves self-serve, so we do a lot of work in utilities. So the idea of getting people to log on and just be able to self-serve themselves, and particularly in the business-to-business market, that's hugely valuable because time is of the essence. It allows you to personalize your service. I should say all of these are going to be available, so you don't need to worry about scribing or writing, you can get access to them. Providing online support, data capture, it allows you to innovate, because if you've got data that you can analyze and understand, it allows you to understand where the potential opportunities may lie and therefore how you go about innovating them. There are some great collaboration platforms online now that are relatively inexpensive, and it's an area that we're increasingly looking at working with. We actually have a partnership with one of the platforms. And the idea that you can collaborate and innovate at the same time, way beyond your internal resource, is really interesting. We've done some work for the Royal Academy of Dance, and they're currently looking at a very innovative way of hooking up their global infrastructure so that they can share ideas online and actually test them and proof of concept them and pilot them out into the world. Obviously reporting, information and management reporting, really interesting. Driving sales and transactions, because again, it's seamless online, and a lot of people now, their expectation is that they can just transact online. And obviously driving efficiencies, we've already talked about data. Where I, and indeed Kat and I, spend most of our time is actually over here. Because all of this is great, but what it actually does is free up your staff to do more of this cool stuff that humans are really good at. It gives them more time as people. Some of the work we're doing with a couple of the charities we're working at is actually one of our core outcomes is how can we automate and use data and technology to get rid of a huge set of work so that we can free our guys up to go and work with our service users more, so that they can actually have more customer-facing time, if you will, and less time doing the boring administrative stuff that actually a machine is ideally suited to do. It means that they've got more time to think, and more time to create, and more time to be idea creators. It means that we can free them up to give them leadership skills. One of the key areas that we focus on is the fact that it's not really anymore, I think, about an egotistical, ego-driven, command and control organizational structure. If you want people to be collaborative and if you want people to innovate, you actually have to be quite kind of eco in the collaboration setup. You need to have as flat a structure as possible, and you need to empower people to make decisions and just get on and do things. And that requires a different way of working in a different culture. So we spend a lot of time looking at leadership skills, and specifically the soft skills that go beyond your day job and your job title. Developing new skills, interfacing old and young. We do a lot of this, organizational restructuring. Hands up all of you who think that your organizational structure is exactly as you need it to be digitally centric. Yeah. So a lot of what we do as part of our reporting is actually to sit and work out what that organizational structure needs to be. We do a big skills analysis piece. So what are the gaps that we need to fill, and how do we fill them? Do we upskill them, or do you actually need to go and hire? And if you need to hire, what are the job specs that you need to go and get? What's the market value of somebody like that? What's the impact, and how much return are they going to give you for the outlay that you're going to need? And when are they likely to start bringing that return? So is it a 6-month roll-up time? Is it a 6-week? Is it a 6-day? Delivering opportunities. So I come back to the scary bit. A lot of people, when you first talk to them, kind of go, it's a really scary thing, I'm probably going to lose my job. But when you start having this conversation, they suddenly start going, oh, so we're going to need people with social skills, social media skills. Well, I've been doing that on my own, personally, for whatever. So if you can show me how to use Hootsuite or any of the kind of platforms that work on that, and I can actually be employed to do that in order to be a social monkey for such and such an organization, that'd be great. And actually, that's really interesting. We find people who love Google Analytics because they've got a very analytical outlook, so you can bring them in to do that. So delivering opportunity and new career paths is a really interesting conversation. We also spend a long time reappraising roles, and that then comes back to the Board of Trustees. There was a piece of research done 2016, early 17, that of the FTSE 100, only 5 boards had a digitally centric member on the board. Somebody who actually knew what digital technology and digital, the space of digital was actually all about. So you're not alone in having boards of trustees that actually don't really understand the digital space. And I agree with you, I think the boards of trustees of charities have to have at least 1, if not 2 people on board who understand that. Invariably younger, but certainly from a background that's more digitally centric if they're going to have any chance of being successful. And that in and of itself is quite a cultural challenge. Okay. So, these are kind of questions that we usually ask right at the start when we get involved with clients. And so they're important questions. And what you've got to do is frame the questions with regards to the future, rather than where you are now. So it may be that the services you're providing right now are fit for purpose right now, but you've got to try and have a look at 18 months, 2 years down the line and say, okay, 2 years from now, what do we want to be known for? Do we still want to be known for what we do, or actually is our world changing, and do we need to change in order to be known for the right thing or to provide the service that we need to in order to meet our charitable vision, our charitable mission, the goals that we have? Once you've defined that, you then need to know, right, well, which customers and services are we actually targeting? Because actually, is it changing? Or if it's changing, are we targeting the same people, but their needs are changing? So again, we come back to young people entering the workplace, or even just young people in society. It's very rare now that you will be able to engage them in traditional ways, because they will access content and information on a phone of some description or a digital device of some description. So if one of your core target markets is people under, say, the age of 20, 25, you're going to need to be able to interact with them in a way that they expect. And if you can't, but somebody else can, they will default to the person that can. And so you will start to lose market share. What are our core capabilities and points of differentiation? Long word to say. And again, that's about what are they now, but what do they need to be 2 years from now in order for us to continue to operate? And then it's about, if we're going to do this digital evolution piece, what do we need to do in order to strengthen the capabilities and your points of differentiation? So that's a key benchmark for anything that's an outcome. And then, what's your digital maturity? So for me, digital maturity, so you're about to start a journey and you need to know where you're going, but you also need to know where you're starting from. Because only then can you check how far you've come and benchmark yourself against the journey that you're on. So digital maturity for us is very much about what's the starting point? Where are we actually beginning from? And how can we then have a sanity check to make sure that we're heading in the right direction? Come on to that in a minute. So these are questions that you can go back and ask your organizational, whether it's your team or your board or working groups or whatever kind of forums you might have. And it will be interesting to know, just at the start of the journey where you are. How well do you know where change is going to come? That's a big question, and we can easily spend an hour in a workshop talking about that particular question. Do you know which customer journeys matter? And that customer journey for us is not just about on a website, clicking here and going there. It's about from first contact with the organization to whatever the outcome might be. Do you know what those journeys are and which ones matter? And from there you can then say, so where can digital help support change, maybe take some of the administrative burden, heavy lifting, et cetera, et cetera. Are your teams truly collaborating across functions? So one organization that we've just finished working with had 7 departments. There were 2 of those departments that I would say were truly collaborating. The other 5 would get drawn in and drawn out piecemeal, depending on who they knew or whether they were pals with somebody that was involved. So there was no central kind of driver to get all departments of that organization. It's quite a large organization together on a regular basis to talk about what was going on from a digital technology point of view and what that technology might be able to do for other parts of the organization. So a more formal way of doing that, I think, is really important. We talked about agile and this whole idea of fail fast. So the conversations we have in the public sector about fail fast is always fascinating because they don't like failure and they certainly don't want to fail fast, so they don't do anything, by and large. Sweeping statement, but true. Do you have a disciplined test and learn approach? So that comes back to agile. The decision horizon now in technology is roughly 3 to 6 months. If you haven't made a decision to either use or not use within that time, you've probably missed an opportunity and you need to be rethinking. And that's quite a scary prospect. So you have to be able to make decisions quickly in a way that mitigates risk and then understand when you're succeeding and keep doing it and understand when you're failing and stop doing it quickly so you don't waste any more money and reapportion your focus and your budget accordingly. So that's very much an agile way of working. And as an agency, digital agency, we work very much in an agile way. We do retrospectives and stand-ups and futurespectives and all of that kind of good stuff on a fortnightly basis. And we will be making decisions about the direction of travel for all of our projects and all of our technologies and all of our standards in that manner. So fortnightly decision making about which way and how the agency is going to go. How many of your digital investments are tied to measurable outcomes? People do that? Anybody do that? No. So again, this is about, if you're going to have a roadmap and you're going to have a digital strategy, what is it trying to deliver and how are you going to measure whether it's actually delivering that? So KPIs, measurables, I'm going to invest £5 in this particular thing because 6 months from now we'll be able to generate £10, ergo we'll have had a return of £5 or 100%. And I can measure that as an outcome. So again, really, really important. Do you have internal mechanisms to safely challenge ideas? Now that's a cultural thing. I would say that in my experience, most charities and most third sector organizations have a much better culture for challenging ideas than some of the larger organizations we work with, just because of the type of people that they tend to have on staff. but you need to be able to safely challenge ideas. And again, it comes back to that rather than command and control, more of a kind of ecological type, tribal type management structure. Are your people empowered to act? This is an interesting, is your IT operating at two speeds? So what we mean by that is, do you have a business as usual operation that keeps the organization running, but at the same time, are your IT and infrastructure people trying stuff? Are they looking at how iPads in the field might be able to better supply data seamlessly into your database so that your people out in the field don't have to hard enter the content? Are they looking at dictation software so that when you're actually having an interview with somebody, you don't have to type it up afterwards because it's automatically happening, getting uploaded to the cloud and pushed straight into the file and the record that's there in a secure manner, the manner that meets GDPR requirements, as an example. So are they trying that, and are they doing it in a risk mitigated fashion so that you're not chucking loads of money at something that may or may not work, but you can at least test it? Meanwhile, you're still running business as usual. That's kind of what we mean by that. And then finally, are you as an organization coordinating a portfolio of initiatives with a single defined outcome? So that's a whole bunch of stuff, because digital evolution is messy. There's usually, I think we've had, the smallest amount of work streams we've had from any of our recommendations was 4, the most we've had is 13, and in each one of those work streams there's usually been sub-work streams that sit underneath that, all of which are interlinked. So, but all of it is focused on a single outcome, which is to make whatever organization more digitally effective, more digitally efficient, more technologically astute, but by and large serving their user better, in whichever way that's defined. So that's those 9. And this is really what we set ourselves as a task. So when we're sitting with clients, and again, this is all relevant, it doesn't need to be us, it can be anybody that you're working with, whether it's an internal team or external. But define where your organization should go. So what is the core outcome? Is the vision and the mission that you've got still fit for purpose, or actually does it need to change as the world's changing? Who will lead the effort? And for us, it's not one person. I think Maddie said it's everyone's. And we always look upon the digital challenge as everyone's and no one's. And quite often in organizations, that's the big challenge, is that everybody's waiting for somebody to take on the role, and actually it's everybody's role. And so it's coordinating that kind of groupthink to say, right, okay, we need a team that covers all of the departments at all levels. So it's not just about your senior team. And actually, for me, it's more about the people at the coalface who are actually delivering the services. They invariably know what needs to happen. They invariably have ideas about how to do this. They just need the space and the time and the accountability and authority to get it done. How will you sell the vision to staff and stakeholders? That's really important. We've had a couple of projects that have not gone as well as they could have done because the people weren't brought on board. So everything we do looks at early momentum. All of our recommendations will usually have some form of 3-month, as we hit the ground running, what are we going to deliver that's quick wins that can demonstrate momentum and energize and enthuse people to get involved in this program. So again, I would advise looking at that. Where will you position yourself within the digital ecosystem? How many of you do competitive research on people? Yeah? How many of you are doing that competitive research looking at where your competitors are in the digital world as opposed to just in the service delivery? So again, it's about if the future's digital and if the future's technology and you've got one of your competitors who are starting to invest in that and starting to make that move, are offering online services on mobile for young people for talking sake, and you're not, then you've got to start seeing, well, is that actually where we want to be? Or is our mission and vision more compatible with whatever that might be? So it's not saying that you need to play catch up, you just need to know whether what you need to do is to try and match that or actually position yourself slightly differently within that world. Decision making. So if you're a standard large board of trustees, you probably meet once every quarter. Now I've already said that the decision window for technology is about 3 to 6 months. So if you're going to meet every quarter as a board of trustees and have a discussion about a particular thing that you need to decide upon, probably not decide upon it at that board meeting, but go away because you're going to want more information, more substantive evidence, whatever that may be, and then gather 3 months after that, so 6 months after the idea or issue was raised, you're already way behind the decision horizon, already, as far as technologies are concerned. So So what infrastructure and decision-making processes have you got as an organization that can short-circuit that at least allows you to start or to try or to be involved in a new thing that you can take to the board if you need major sign-off? Have you got a cultural and an organizational infrastructure, financial infrastructure, that allows you access to funding to try stuff? Open question. And if not, how can you make that happen? Which links on to 6, how will you allocate funding rapidly and dynamically? But you've got to do that in a risk-mitigated fashion. And there are ways and means of doing that. There's various models that are around, from the big public sector spin-offs to large private sector spin-offs with innovation labs and hubs and all sorts of things. But there are ways and means of doing that. And it's just about setting the rules of engagement. You know, what is it that you need to provide in order to leverage X amount of funding to try something? On the basis that it's successful, what do you need to provide to then access further funding to scale it up? And on the basis that that's successful, what do you then do to try and roll it out organization-wide? Relatively straightforward, but it needs to be thought through, excuse me, and it needs to be mitigated in the risk appetite that the organization has. And I know I said 7, but actually it's 13, but what should you do and when? So these are just a whole bunch of things that you need to think about. What are the projected benefits of all of that activity? Who and when and do you have time to capture those benefits? What are the interdependencies? So again, this comes back to cross-departmental conversation. If you're trying to do something, is there an interdependency on the finance team or the admin team or somebody up in Aberdeen that's maybe delivering services of the same sort to yourselves? Can you quantify what the investment is needed and how are you going to measure and define the return on that? And again, that's just about understanding and agreeing what those principles are. And every organization usually has a different one. And hopefully you've got a digital strategy with a roadmap that says we're going from here to here. And if that's the case, then if you're doing all of this, what's the impact on all of that on the actual overarching journey and the end game that you're trying to get to? What's the food for thought? Okay, just touch on this. So we refer to our clients, bless them, as tots, teens, adults, and masters. The vast majority sit here. The vast majority. We've only had one that sits up here and no masters at all, because frankly, if there were masters, I'm not sure that they would need us to come in. We basically look at 3 things. The overall digital maturity for the organization, the transactional maturity, and transaction doesn't mean cash, it means where you transact with somebody, usually on a data transaction. So it could be that they're buying stuff from the website, it could be that they're signing up for a course or whatever that may be, but any point where they pass some information to you, we would deem that as a transaction. And how digitally mature you are in that, in capturing, holding the data, and having it in such a fashion that you can interrogate it, understand it, and use it as evidence to then make decisions, maybe in an investment area or whatever, is really, really important. And then invariably, Marcom's maturity is usually, not always, but usually the most mature area, because they usually are using digital to communicate. So they're usually most digitally aware. And we use this, there's a series of questions that you can access online as a starting point, and then we use this as a benchmark throughout the roadmap journey. So as you begin, you know that you're starting here, and then we basically run it every 6 months, every 12 months, depending on what the client wants to do, to see, hopefully, that it's expanding out as you get more and more mature and you raise up the pyramid. But the reason it's important is you need to know where you're starting from. If you don't know where you're starting from, it's very hard to map where you need to get to. And this also helps myself and Kat and the guys understand areas of investigation and questions that we might need to ask, or indeed specific workshops that we might need to have. So one client was very strong here and very strong here, but they had very little, if any, digital maturity in the transactional side of things. So we ran a whole workshop on data capture, data analysis, CRM, IT infrastructure to enable that to happen, et cetera, et cetera. It was a very dry session, but it was really, really interesting because it threw up a huge bunch of questions and targeted us on a set of recommendations from an investment point of view that we could easily say, well, if you invest X, we know that you will get Y out because of the way you're going to run your data much more efficiently. So I get paid to read stuff, which is great. So this is some sound bites from the UNICEF State of the World's Children Report in 2017, which if you haven't read it, you should. It's absolutely fascinating. And there's a whole bunch of new language that's coming through, and this was a survey of 21-year-olds from around the world, and some really interesting words and cultures that are starting to come through that are going to impact, particularly, I think, in the charitable sector and the third sector, but frankly, anywhere in the world of work. I think we're all aware of the cyberbullying and the e-bullying that's going on. What's fascinating from that is that it's not just in the developed countries. Africa is a really interesting continent. They've basically bypassed landlines. So they have gone literally from no phones to mobile technology almost overnight. And the instances of e-bullying in Africa is really, really high. And as a result, it's creating an awful lot of challenges because they've literally gone from no technology to the highest level of technology with all of the impact that has from social media, etc. So there's some really interesting stuff there. Has anybody come across the term sharenting? Apart from Maddie. Yeah? Nobody know what sharenting is? It was brand new to me as well. So this is what's happening when your parents share information about you as an individual on Facebook and social media when you're tiny, or not so tiny, and then your friends stumble across it, or your prospective employers stumble across it, and actually start to damage the psychological well-being of your child without realizing it, because you're sharing stuff that they as an individual might not actually want to be shared. It's also having an impact because sharenting is actually taking over from parenting. So parents are too busy sharing to actually get in amongst it and be with the kids and being online. So it's having a real impact on childhood growth and childhood development. Fascinating. There's a whole section in there. Development of micro-work. So the reason that's important is as the youngsters are starting to come into the workplace, they're actually struggling with doing big tasks that take more than a few minutes because they're used to sound bites. They're used to being able to digest information quickly and access information almost immediately and be also immediately satisfied with any need, information or otherwise, that they might have. And so their attention spans are actually getting smaller and smaller. Their ability to graze information is vast, but their ability to absorb large chunks of information is decreasing around the world. And that's going to have a massive impact on the workplace in the next few years. But it's also going to have a massive impact on society in the next few years. So if you're working in any kind of civic society type operation, that's a factor that you're going to need to be aware of. Young people now very much look upon themselves as being intermediaries. So for their older generation who would normally go to the Encyclopedia Britannica or look to the news on telly, the youngsters now are actually working as the intermediaries apparently and are being lent upon to go and get information. Go and Google that for me. And with the advent of Alexa, fascinating story with my father-in-law who's just got an Alexa, he's 83, bless him, and he spends the whole day now talking to his Alexa. We bought it for him thinking it would be a great way of him not disturbing us by phoning up and saying, what's the weather going to be like? But actually it's now almost not quite isolating, but it's bringing him in, and it's only had it 2 weeks. So the impact of new technology, even on the older generation, is starting to have a really interesting dynamic. We all know about crowdsourcing. How many of you use crowdsourcing to drive new ideas? Any of you go out to your user groups on an online forum or crowdsource any kind of ideas from the people that you're actually delivering services to? So the young generation around the world are using crowdsourcing to decide whether they want to go and work somewhere, or whether they want to go and be in a particular country, or whether they want to go and see a pop concert. They crowdsource information and they crowdsource feedback and reviews almost habitually. So again, when it comes to digital technologies, if you've got somebody who's interested in coming to work either with your charity or at your charity, chances are they're going to crowdsource some information. You're going to look at TripAdvisor in the tourist industry. How long is it going to be before there's a charity advisor set up that people can go and say, right, I need help in this area, which one's the best one? And how do we do that? Anybody come across the term digital tattoos and digital ink? So there's a common misconception around the world in young people that social media is ephemeral and very short term, and you tweet out and it lasts a few seconds and then it's taken over in the stream with everything else that everybody else is tweeting around the world. The reality is, once it's tweeted, once it's put on an online forum somewhere, whatever it may be, in some format, it exists forever somewhere. And if you know how to find it, you can find it. And so what youngsters are finding now is that their previous digital activity is coming back to haunt them, because maybe ideas that they had when they were 14 and 15 and 16, or even 18, 19, 20, and opinions and positions that they had are no longer relevant because they're now late 20s. But when they're going for job interviews, or when they're being looked to maybe head up programs or whatever, people are now researching, and the clever ones know where to research, and all of that follows you. And that's now starting to come back to haunt them. There's an increasing prevalence of under 30s getting online harassment, and that's actually the indicators are that that's only going to get more. So it was under 20s, then under 30s. I think the next group will be under 40s. So online harassment and online bullying is not something just for children. It's actually something that's starting to happen across all age groups. So these are all the kind of negatives. The really good positives, though, are there's an awful lot of this going on. Digital citizenship, the idea that you can actually reach an awful lot more people an awful lot more quickly and talk about civic society and civil society and what it means to be a citizen is much easier, quicker, faster, and cost efficient than ever before. A big barrier, but also a big enabler, is digital literacy. So we're doing some work with Turning Point, I think I said to you. One of the key things that we're looking at is how do you drive digital literacy in the culturally disadvantaged to enable them to better get into civic society. That's a fascinating question, particularly for a charity to look at, because you then get into the mission and vision. Is it actually part of their mission and vision to do that? And if so, what does that mean from a cost point of view, an investment point of view, and actually from a service delivery point of view, how do they do that and where do they leverage the funding from? Or should they be working with the public sector and the private sector and be more running an advocacy role? So there's a huge piece around digital literacy. Has anybody read the reports and the research on digital screens being as addictive as hard drugs? Yeah? So there's a huge piece in the UNICEF piece around young kids being addicted to their phones in the same way that heroin addicts and cocaine addicts and crack addicts are addicted to the hard drugs. And yet, as parents, we're giving young children, I've got a niece who's 4, who spends more time on the iPad than she does interacting with her parents, if she's allowed to. So we're giving a 4-year-old the equivalent of heroin for all intents and purposes. But the digital dependency that she's going to grow up with and that she's then going to have impact on society is massive. It's another thing to be thinking about. Another thing is digital poverty. So I was talking to Deb earlier about, so if you're working in the justice sector and you're getting people to come out of the justice sector and rehabilitate into society, and you're skilling them up to be able to do that, they then leave that institutional area, come into society. If 3% of your users are going to be able to see it, and if not, then actually what is the best investment within the digital arena? Is it actually skills and training? Is it actually, I don't know what it might be because everybody's different, but are there other ways that you could be investing money that might be better? So it's all about the questions that you need to ask. So that leads on to digitally disadvantaged. The bedroom culture, this again is global. Children and young people are no longer actually interacting face to face and having conversations. Even when they are face to face, they tend to be on their phones talking to each other, which is really bizarre. But the bedroom culture is having a massive impact on the social infrastructure on most countries with young people. So again, that's a really interesting dynamic that you need to be thinking about when you're looking at your digital roadmap. And the final one, which for me is probably the most important, which is why it's in red, is there is a huge dismantling of traditional protections. So if you think back to when I was at school, when I was a lad, you would come home from school and you wouldn't see your pals, and if you were lucky, you might get a landline phone call if you got permission from your parents to phone your mate because you forgot to ask him such and such about where you were going to be on Saturday or whatever. Now, our children are always online, 24/7, again, if you let them. There is no traditional protections from bullying, there's no traditional protections from the wider society. So that's another big area that I think the third sector needs to be looking at. And what do we do about that, and how do we actually manage that as an issue? I'm nearly done. bit of self-promotion, but we are running a digital wake-up on digital transformation and some of the projects we've done. It's not actually us selling, it's actually getting Roberta Doyle from National Theatre Scotland, who we delivered their roadmap for 6, maybe 8 months ago, and Mark Bevan, who's the Chief Executive of SCDI, in a room and basically getting those that come along to quiz them and ask them actually what it meant and why did they do what they did and what impact has it had. So it's in Edinburgh, it's fairly early, 8:30 to 10:30, and I'll pass those details over to Maddie, she'll send them around. If you want to come along, it's limited, it's only about 20, but it'll give you a forum to speak to a couple of people who've been through the process of devising the strategy, devising the roadmap, and actually start to roll it out, and they're there to be basically quizzed and take from them what you can. And that's me. Hope that was interesting. Any questions? Stunned silence. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Oh. Go for it.
I thought it was really fascinating. Thank you so much. I just thought there was an interesting contrast between the real emphasis on opportunity within organisations, and then when we moved through to the sort of UNICEF study, it suddenly felt a lot darker. I don't know how else picked that up. And I wonder, and you did draw out some opportunity there as well, but does that shift in tone reflect your how you see that, or is that just a consequence of the way the presentation was structured?
Probably a consequence of the way the presentation was structured, but that's a great question. I think it's indicative of when you, so what you embark on is a journey, and it's an ongoing, it's never ending, you know, there's no end in sight. And I think when you start the conversation with people about that, it tends to start quite dark and quite fearful. And I see part of our role as not dismissing it out of hand, but showing them that within all of that there is actually a big opportunities there, and it is about mindset and kind of culturally thinking. But I mean, I focused on that for this particular presentation. We don't normally go into that much detail, but because we're working currently with a couple of charities, you guys have you have a much different view of the world, say, than a big utility corporate or even a big public sector body, potentially, because of the types of people that you're going to be interacting with, potentially. And so the conversations that we've been having with our charities tend to be much different from, you know, a big corporate, because for a big corporate it's about, you know, how do we keep our customers, how do we win new customers, and how do we make money, fundamentally. So they're relatively straightforward from a road mapping point of view. But from a third sector point of view, the conversation is going to be about money, but it's not about how do we make money for the sake of making money. It's about how do we make money in order to reinvest it back into the services and our charitable mission and vision. And invariably, because of the areas that you're working, those investment decisions need to be made within the context of who you're going to be interacting and working with. And I do see the young people, the children and the young people that are entering the marketplace 5 to 10 years now to that point as being quite a challenge, both corporately but also from an organisational point of view, because of the expectations that they've got. And because, you know, if you work with children in particular and you go back to all of this stuff that they're having to deal with, and this is an open question, I don't know the answer, is providing yet another digital channel for them to interact with, given that it's as addictive as heroin, the way that it should be done? Or actually is part of the outcome for the roadmap to say, well, actually what we need to do is offer them a detox space? Open question. So actually is your investment on your digital transformation roadmap not to invest in digital, but actually to create something that allows them to come in and have no technology at all for a few hours? So it's not, you know, our default position is not, all right, you need 3 of these, 2 of those, 1 of those, and a new shiny box in the corner to run it all. It's about what does your organisation need to do to fulfil its mission within the infrastructure, within the environment that you're actually operating in. And every single one's different. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions? No?
Cool.
Thank you.
I'll sit back down again.
If there is, come back up again. Thank you
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much. Thank you very much, Steve. For me, there was a lot of information in there, in a good way, not as a, oh my God, that was so much information, with very similar things as we were talking about, that idea that it is about people and about being able to show that the short-term investment in a digital tool or a digital tech will have long-term rewards with the people that we work with. So it's that being able to do that return on investment, the basic economics of a cost-benefit analysis, and bringing that into the way that we work to show that if we do this now, then in the future, this is what will happen. And I think for some of us in the third sector, that's quite a new thing to be able to do that. We can be quite reactionary due to the funding. Sometimes our funding is only 3 months, never mind 5 years. That would be absolutely amazing if it was 5 years. So it's kind of the environment that we're in. So it's not just about changing us and our cultures and our leadership. It's also about changing the funders. Definitely. But it was quite topical within our team. We've just started to work with a youth organisation called Project Scotland, and their chief exec has said, don't introduce me to that Slack thing, I am not digital. So, interesting. However, he's on it and he's interacted with it, so it's great. But they've been talking about how, we don't like to spend time on our mobiles because, there's that whole thing, we should really not get that addicted to them. And this was apparently an article in the Telegraph and in the Guardian quite recently, was in the last 2 weeks, about the time that we spend. The Guardian in particular has got a really good, case studies of different people from different backgrounds and how they spend their time using their digital devices and what they do about it and how they measure that and what that means and how they can cut that down. The Telegraph is a bit more hate 'em, scare 'em. It's a bit more, this is awful, stop doing this, you will die. Whereas the Guardian's like, well, there's an interesting side, there's other sides to this as positive too, so it's kind of that thing. But it's quite topical at the moment about that, are people addicted, is it there? And I do that myself, because of these articles, I've just recently, there's an app, obviously, that tells you how much time you're spending on watch apps. So every time I pick up my phone, it's recording that, and it tells me what I'm doing whilst I'm doing it. And I found it really interesting. I did it for 2 weeks since we started these conversations, and I actually used my phone way less than I thought I did, which was really interesting. But what I found was, it's because I'm on my iPad all the time. So that's really interesting. I'm always on my phone. Turns out I'm not, I'm on my iPad. So it's like, well, what am I going to do about that? Or what am I using my iPad? Searching for shoes. A lot of people are. So it's just that kind of understanding what we're using it for, which I find quite interesting. So another insight into my personal life, not necessary. So if you would like to grab another quick cup of tea, go to the loo quickly. Ross, if that's all right with you, give people a quick second so you can set up, then please do while we get Ross set up with his presentation. Thank you very much. We'll do that now.
it's when you're in a place and you're speaking and you can hear yourself speaking, but then you hear the delay from speakers at the other end of this. Yeah, not.
We'll move on. We'll move on to Ross. So Ross is now here. Sorry, it's like he's just
It's not a
teleported.
hologram or a ghost.
He is really actually here.
Yep.
Amazing. Ross is going to talk to you about the 13 big questions to ask, because it says on his slides. So I'll hand you over to Ross, and
Cool.
I'll get out there.
Hello. So the slides probably will come out via email afterwards at some point, but also there's a bit.ly link there to the slides. So it's just bit.ly/13 big questions. So if you want them open just now or you want to look at them, then you can do that. So basically these are questions that came up throughout the action learning set which I've run. Sorry, just interrupts me time. So these are the big questions that came up during the action learning set which I ran as part of the One Digital Senior Leadership Programme, which has been running for the last few years, run on behalf of SCVO, which Maddie's run with me now, which is quite exciting. So we've got our 2018 cohort at the moment. I've also interspersed that with quotes from a variety of leaders across the third sector that I think would be quite useful, and tried to chunk it up into key themes around culture and leadership and data and flexible technology. So we'll explore these, be pretty quick, about 15 minutes, and there'll be a chance for questions. All my contact details in the first slide and the last slide as well. So the other thing I've done is the first 6 or 7 slides are kind of front loaded with loads of resources and tools and guides and case studies and other stuff. I'll quickly ping through these. So this is a really useful video if you've not seen this, from Jo Wolf, who is now at Reason Digital but used to be at Breast Cancer Care. And she's talking about their digital maturity journey. So it's a presentation she gave at an event last year. It's really, really useful if you're thinking about starting this journey yourselves. Also some of the stuff around the digital maturity matrix that she came up with. And what I would say, and I don't know if Maddie's spoken about this, am I allowed to speak about this, that you've got, so SCVO's got a digital maturity matrix that they're piloting at the moment, which would be quite useful in terms of benchmarking where your organisations are at, the areas of your organisation that maybe need to be developed, and where that's going to go forward in the future. Right, so what's some useful stuff? Loads of useful stuff in there as starting points. This one's quite good. I know you've been speaking already about the importance of getting trustees behind this, but a really useful 12 questions for trustees to consider when they're thinking about where digital fits within the organisation. So if your next board meeting, take that along, print it out, and have that as part of the agenda, getting people to address these 12 areas. What else is in there? Loads of stuff around the cultural stuff. This Charity Digital Skills Report, there's going to be a new version of that coming out soon, so there's a consultation on that just now. If you're looking for 2 books that I would recommend, these 2 from Beth Cantor. Again, the slides have all these. Everywhere you see a link in the slides, it will take you straight to those resources. Some really useful stuff on service design, particularly in Scotland at the moment. This site, I don't know if you've come across this, Scottish Approach to Service Design from Cat Macaulay at the Scottish Government. So that gathers together best practice, a whole load of free toolkits, all manner of stuff. She's also quite clear that if you're interested in thinking about how do you go right back to basics to understand what your service users need, where does digital fit within that, how are they living their lives, the service design team in the Scottish Government are quite keen to work with more third sector organisations, so that's worth getting in touch with her. There's a whole raft of other service design stuff in there as well. Loads of stuff on tools. This in particular is pretty useful. Charity Catalogue. I don't know if anyone's used this. So the SCVO team, you guys feed into this now, don't you? So that's basically a single site that has either free or charity specific programs. So things like Google Grants or things like Canva for non-profits, for example. And that's all categorised by CRM and data, video editing, graphic design. So whatever you're looking to do in terms of those digital tools, there's a whole raft of either free or low-cost stuff in there. And then in terms of data, a couple of books that I would recommend. This one in particular, Data-Driven Non-Profits by Steve McLaughlin. It's got quite a strong fundraising focus, but if you're thinking about how do you put data front and centre, how do you use it as a decision-making tool, that book is written in plain English. Anyone can get their head around that. There's some really useful advice in there. And that playbook at the top is actually free. It's a trust in the United States developed that, so you can go and download that at the link. Right, okay, so this is it in a nutshell, and I think this is pretty much what you guys have spoken about already. So this is about service transformation enabled by digital, not digital transformation. So going back to thinking, what do our service users want? What do they need? How are they living their lives? And thinking about where digital inclusion fits within that, and how do our services reflect that? So for me, this is a big accessibility issue. Too many people putting up a massive brick wall where they say, our service users don't use digital, therefore we just won't do anything digital at all. They've never asked their service users how they're using digital. They maybe have a preconceived idea about a broadband connection at the home and a device that looks like that. It's a really interesting report just got released today from Citizen Advice Scotland. And yeah, it was Citizen Advice Scotland, wasn't it? Yeah. I think, was it in partnership with SCVO? Yeah. Yeah. You're going to claim credit for it? Just go for it. Yeah, cool. But that's got some really useful stuff on how people are accessing citizens advice bureaus across Scotland are using digital in their day-to-day lives. And given a lot of those clients might be a similar demographic to some of the clients that you're working with, it's worth going and looking at that and starting to sense check how are people using digital. But yeah, as long as you can get your board, your chief exec, your senior team and your staff team to think about this, everything else will fit into place. So, big questions. Do you really know how your beneficiaries are using digital in their day-to-day lives? And which of your current services would benefit most from digital? So I think for me, this thing is not to think about, right, how do we change a charity that's maybe got 2,000 staff overnight, but is there something that feels ripe for change? Is there an area of our work where our service users are coming to us to tell us they want that support online, they want that signposting online? Actually, that needs to be the point at which we start. Okay, until we're further along this process, your CEO is your head of digital. How many in the room think your chief exec gets this stuff? One person? That's good. One person out of the whole room. Excellent. Good. Okay. Starting with your chief exec is pretty important. Do not leave this up to the digital person in your organisation, no matter how competent they are. When that person tries to drive change, is that actually going to happen if your chief exec doesn't buy into this or think this is important? So are your CEO, your senior team and your board serious about digital? Is it still seen in a comms silo or a fundraising silo? Are they thinking about your organisation as a whole? Have you started with that simple question of why? So we spoke about that at the start of the day. Okay, Vicky Brown from Charity Comms. Culture is the fundamental thing. You can talk about digital. If you don't change the culture of the organisation, nothing will happen. It'll just be window dressing. And this was one of the big things that came out of the action learning sets with senior leaders, was actually having good ideas and understanding what services are right for change, but that culture within the organisation wasn't ready for staff to take risks. Someone saying my name there? Did I just? No. I'm actually imagining things. That's good, right? Okay.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah, I can speak up. Does this just go through to there? It doesn't actually go through to a set of speakers then?
I think it's just through to
Oh, is it just to there? That's okay. I'll speak up. There's a lot of building work going on outside. I can only speak so much over JCBs. Right, does your culture allow staff to share or learn from their successes and their mistakes? How do people feel their meetings look like that? Do your meetings operate like that in an organisation? Yeah. Do you want to tell us about your amazing meetings? You're the only person nodding their head.
Well, I work for the Alliance, so I mean, I think that is sort of a culture where they really want you to have that process of learning,
Yep.
go through things and evaluating, and do that as a cycle.
Yep.
So I think in terms of what we do, it's definitely allowed to happen.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the simplest shifts, but the biggest shifts that people who were successful in action learning sets made was simply changing the way meetings work in your organisation. So moving away from a 4-hour success fest where you read out a list of 12 things you've done over the last month and everyone nods and then you all go away, nobody decided anything or nothing actually happened, is actually how do you shorten those meetings? So one person came up with this really simple idea that every member of staff gets to say one thing they've done in the last month and one exciting thing that they're working on that they want other staff to get involved in. So you get two items on that agenda, one of which is about a thing you've done and the other thing is about a thing that we're going to be working on. Mary, who used to be chief exec in Scotland at Breast Cancer Now, Breast Cancer Now, Breast Cancer Care, I always get two of them mixed up. Really simple thing that she did was she changed her staff meetings to basically planning meetings where anyone could come up with ideas for future campaigns or changes to areas of work. One really simple one, a junior member of staff came up with an idea for a campaign, so they put all the ideas up and post-it notes on the wall, and everyone, were you struggling to hear me? Sorry. So everyone voted on the campaigns that they were interested in, and that campaign, which a junior member of staff came up with, became a national campaign adopted by their London office. So again, just thinking about, are the ways that you run meetings maybe not conducive to some of this stuff to take place in the first place? And email as well. Email just, how much of a time sink is email? Thinking about some simple tools that you could adopt internally to communicate better. Right, Bob Barber, who is head of digital at Shelter. Really simple one this, but thinking about how you chunk stuff down, and this is the approach that they take. So pick a problem, solve it in as cheap a way as possible. Set some sensible metrics, see if it works. If it doesn't, don't worry because you haven't spent much and you're probably learning something quite valuable. Do it 10 times and you'll wake up to find you've built the whole system for a fraction of the cost. So just thinking about that digital maturity journey that you were talking about earlier, how do we chunk this stuff up? What does this look like in our organisation? Rather than thinking about this as digital transformation, this big giant procurement process that we're going to do overnight that our staff don't buy into and it costs us an absolute fortune to implement. There's a really good, actually, if you Google it, there's a good blog post from Bob talking about that process. You'll find it if you're searching Google for it. So do your teams think about digital as more than just social media on your website? Who feels that they're maybe still in that kind of silo that is very much about how they communicate and it's not about how they transact? Does everyone who feel that that's where their organisation's at? Yeah, okay. And assuming that the tools you need already exist, not rush into bespoke solutions. So in the charity sector, we love thinking that the work that we do is really special and unique, and we need to buy this CRM that a man in a bad suit has told us we need that costs 40 grand when probably Salesforce would have done exactly the same job and we could have got it for free. So thinking about assuming that the tools you need already exist off the shelf rather than rushing to those bespoke solutions. And then that final one, why do you still have a server in your cupboard? Who still has a server in the cupboard somewhere? Don't be ashamed, it's fine, it's okay. Some of you maybe have good reasons for having a dusty server in the cupboard. I used to work in a charity where when I came into post, I was asking about where do the emails actually come from? Because I know we've got an IT support team, but we don't actually pay them for a server. And then a member of staff was like, I have no idea, and then opened a cupboard that literally nobody knew this cupboard existed, and there was an old server in there that was the email server for the organisation, that they were still spending tons of cash every year to maintain this thing. So when Google's G Suite and 365 exist and have plenty of free offerings for charities in Scotland, ask yourself the question, are you spending tens of thousands of pounds a year on that dusty old server when there's something cloud-based that's much more robust and much more secure? Right, so Steve, whose book I mentioned earlier on, so without data, decisions are left to tribal knowledge, or worse, the whims of the highest paid person's opinion. Probably all seen this happen in charities. Either the highest paid person's opinion or the shoutiest person in a meeting. That's a terrible way to make decisions about the people that you support. So thinking about not just how does data drive fundraising or help us think about content for a Facebook page, but actually how do we use data to continually evolve the services we deliver so that they're as best as they can be for the people that we're there to serve. So, more questions on data. Is data your key decision-making tool? Could it give you that strong competitive advantage? So when you go with that project idea to the big lottery fund or the Scottish Government or the NHS, you have a really clear, stable basis for the need for that and how you're going to evolve that project as it moves on. Where's the first quick win in your organisation? Online giving, we've spoken about it, is a good place to begin because you can show those tangible results really quickly, and you need to hire or train someone to ensure that you've got the right skills in-house. Right, this is quite useful. So this is, I guess, a statement on where Parkinson's are going with digital transformation. I would argue this is a wee bit simplistic, but for those of you in the room who want to think about how do I sell this at my board or my chief exec or that wider staff team, it's often useful to have a really simple, clear, plain English statement of what this means to your organisation, both internally and externally, and getting staff involved in this process. So maximise the potential of digital technologies to improve the lives of people affected by Parkinson's, internally, embracing opportunities to operate more effectively and efficiently within the charity, and externally by looking at how we can reach, involve, and serve people affected by Parkinson's in new and better ways. So really, really simple, but helping people understand what this means, not that they need to go and read some 14-page document or they need to go to a 4-hour meeting to understand digital change, but actually summing it up in really simple terms. Right, I'm going to shut up. Is there any questions? What is that noise? That must be terrible when that's going in that video. Is this, what is it?
Any questions for us? That was a whistle stop tour.
No questions? You've not had enough coffee, clearly.
No questions for Ross. Can I apologise to Ross, first of all, for the band that started to rehearse
Was it a
across
band?
the road, which I don't think helped either, as well as the roadworks that are happening, and apologise to yourself as an audience for having to cope with that as well while Ross was speaking. So I do apologise, Ross. That's quickly trying to close all the windows. But they were, I think it was a rock band in the O2 across the road that started there. For me, just what the two speakers have come up with, and certainly just from out of that with Ross, is actually thinking about that whole service design process. That I kind of mentioned that right at the start. I called it a whole systems approach. Is it having that, using our tools, using these checkup tools, these maturity models to find out where's the starting point, and then using that to think about, right, where do we start? Where's the gaps? What do our service users want? Who is it that the people that we serve, who are they? What do they want? How can we help them better? And I think that has traditionally for us in the third sector, it's as workers, as frontline workers, that's how we would choose to work, but our kind of our senior, our top level has been, what is it? Where are we going? Where's the money? What can we do to fill that gap? So we tend to have had this kind of strange balance between chasing funds and actually providing a service. And we don't necessarily see ourselves as businesses because we don't make a product and we don't make a profit. Whereas now there's more of a move to actually thinking about, well, it's the people that we serve. They're the profit. If we can save money by introducing digital tools, then that means we can work with more people, and that is our profit. Our profit is we've increased our capacity and we've increased the reach of our organisation and we've helped more of the people that we work with. And that's what seems to be what's coming through and what we're starting to do in the way that we are culturally changing the way that we work, from small organisations to the big nationals. And when we first started, the three of us, particularly in One Digital 2 years ago, we were continually asked for examples. Give us examples of organisations that have introduced new technology. Give us examples of people doing this. And we didn't have any. The ones that we did have, we were few and far between, but they were from big national organisations that didn't transfer to a lot of the stuff that was happening on the ground in Scotland and to the smaller local communities. Some of those big nationals had a lot of money and a lot of weight to be able to just spill that in. But even then, as we've heard from Ross and Steve, just filling those gaps and pouring money into it, that's not the way to go. It's about that whole process. It's about staff. It's about the people who use the service. It's about the trustees, upskilling people and including everybody in that journey. There's an organisation out in East Lothian whose chief exec is quite digital savvy. Bought everybody iPads because he likes Macs, but didn't provide training to the staff to use the iPads when they were out and about. And they're a youth agency, so they do quite a lot of stuff outdoors. So the iPads a couple of them were broken, don't tell anybody. But they weren't used. They weren't used at all, and people didn't care for them because a lot of the staff didn't know how to use them and they didn't know why they were being given them. So it's that whole thing about chief execs introducing a brand new CRM and forcing it on the staff, and the staff going, this doesn't work. So it's the wrong way round. It's starting with the service user and starting with actually what is it that we want to do, what's the purpose, then getting those people in, getting the staff in and saying what would work for you, and then also kind of doing it from the other end about what is it our funders need, what do we need, and doing that whole approach and working together. There's been a lot recently, or not, thankfully not so much recently, but certainly 2 years ago about that, as you kind of said, that whole starting from the top, that command and control. We've got a new CRM, you will all use it. And as a member of staff, I'm sitting there going, I'm not so sure I'm going to use that. Because you've not told me why, you've not told me what the purpose is, and you've not told me the benefits to me, and in particular, the people that I'm working for. How's it going to help them? So if we're doing it together and we're collecting that data, then that data is going to help people that we work with, because we can then be more evidence-based, we can target our funding better, we can increase capacity, and that increases stretch and scope of what we're able to do. And that is very clear with kind of what's coming out from the two of you, and also with our, with ourselves at SCBO. Yep. Question?
Hi, my name is Derek Todd. I work for the Scottish Council on Deafness. I still work as a consultant for the British Sign Language Users. You raised a point in the PowerPoint earlier, Steve, and Ross, both about certain things, and I'm worried about accessibility to some of these digital technologies, and just conscious that we have over 1 million people with a disability. That includes those with learning difficulties, sensory loss and different things. And so businesses obviously can be attracted to having flashy technology designs and wanting bespoke colours and making it attractive and so on. But that's great for people that can access it. But what about inclusive communication? Making sure that information is clear and plain, that we take into account people with sight loss and other sensory loss. As Scottish Council on Deafness, we're thinking about our customers who are our profit. I like that analogy. You know, and third sector organisations perhaps need to pay greater attention to accessibility. Funders perhaps don't always consider that. We therefore have to rely on legacies and things to support us. And so for the Scottish Council on Deafness, the challenge that we face is we might have to work 2 or 3 times as hard with the research we're producing because we have to film them, edit them, but then we have to put subtitles on, BSL translation. Whereas if it's a hearing person, they just film it, they can put it out because they're not considering all the accessibility issues. And so I just raised this, that we are in this digital world. It is going to be here permanently, but we need to make sure that other individuals are not left behind, but the fact that they're treated equally as we go through this digital transformation. People should be able to go on a website or any other platform and access resources in an accessible way, whether it be looking at the SUBO website. I've not seen any SUBO materials with British Sign Language on, for instance, that would make it accessible for deaf sign language users, and so I think that's a wider debate and discussion that needs to take place.
I would disagree. I mean, if you're interested in that, actually, there's a really nice book from Sarah Richards, who was the woman who managed the redesign of the UK government site, talking about accessibility, but accessibility in the broadest possible sense, not just in terms of specific disabilities, but people where English isn't their first language, or if they don't have good literacy skills, and her talking about that process that they went through. And that UK government site, she would acknowledge, is still not 100% perfect, but actually is probably the gold standard globally in terms of accessibility. And that book's written in plain English. So if you're thinking about how do we think about what we're doing online from an accessibility point of view, her book is worth reading. It's about £10 on Amazon. Really,
What's the book again?
It's called Content Design. It talks basically through that process that they went through in the UK government, and it's got some really simple things that you can embed in your own processes. So that's worth a look.
It's quite small as well. That's the one you had it the other day.
Yeah.
It's not a massive tome of a book. It's actually quite small, and you could literally carry it in your pocket, I think.
Because I think, I mean, a lot of people think being accessible needs to be expensive, or we need to buy these very complicated tools, and actually sometimes it might just be common sense, or it might be working with an organisation like yours to think about what is this actually going to look like in reality for our users. So having those conversations rather than thinking we'll buy an expensive tool and we'll stick it on the website and then we'll just be accessible, which is what a lot of people do.
It's an interesting one because we're a digital agency, so we invariably are, about 10 years ago, the idea of being accessible was seen as being an extra. It was something that was seen as, oh, well, if you need to be accessible, it's going to cost you more money. It's something that is an add-on. And our world is very much flipped on its head now. And the premise that something is accessible means that it will be universally great. So, by that I mean, if you can make it accessible for people with some form of disability, then people without a disability will automatically make it easier for them to use as well. And if you can make that user experience as easy to use as possible, then you're going to get more users. Fundamentally, so it's like a core principle should be, it should just be accessible. The end. The challenge we face, particularly in the corporate world, is that does mean that you need to not add in necessarily all the whistles and bells that you can as a starting point. But then it's the fundamental principles of good design. Good design is good design because it's accessible.
Yeah,
so that should be your default position. So we always do everything AA as a minimum, and normally AAA standard for the W3C standards. And anybody you're working with, that should be what you're asking them to do from a digital output.
That's certainly, the team that we work in, as I said, we've got developers, and as we can quite easily ask Callum, have we thought about that? Why didn't we thought about that? Because we've got other accessibility features, so why don't we have that? And what would it take to have that feature? That's something we can take back. We can ask him tomorrow. Before he goes on holiday, actually. He's going on holiday for a week, so we might ask him today before he goes. The other, on a self-promotion note, we actually have a meetup happening in March in Glasgow on accessibility and video creation. So there's one of our members who works in Renfrewshire, he came to a video and content marketing meetup and then had a personal rant about, well, you've not mentioned accessibility. So he then said, I'll run a meetup for you and show you how to do this. So he's going to be using a lot of the free things and the free tools that are out there and show us how to do some of the things you were talking about putting subtitles on and using all these different things there that aren't necessarily Google Translate, which doesn't necessarily translate things particularly well into subtitles. So that is happening, and that we'll be putting information out, so that's just a bit of self-promotion. But definitely, it's things that we're considering, and as Ross said, that's definitely about working with the people, as you're saying, so you know what you're talking about, you know what's out there and what some of the issues are, and that's working with organisations that are the experts in the field, and that's part of that collaboration that Steve was talking about. Are we truly collaborating? And should we be making use of that, other organisations, and working in partnership? I think sometimes we can pay lip service to partners because the funding bid says you must have a partner. So we go, oh, it'll be great, let's work with each other.
Sorry,
but with
that meeting in March, do you have dates?
Not yet. I've not quite decided when it's going to happen, but it will be in March. I've got a bit of annual leave, so I'm still figuring it out. But there's that kind of thing in the third sector where we'll have a partner, let's work together, and then we tick a box, but our goals are separate, so we're not actually working towards the same aim. Whereas now with true collaboration, that's the way that we're working, is we're changing that, and that again is the cultures that are actually starting to say, we're doing the same thing, let's do that together so we can affect and work with more people on a much wider scale and a bigger audience. And that is that kind of true collaboration. It's not easy, even in our own team. We use all these digital tools and we're encouraged and we get our time to look at things that are out there, but we still work in our silos. It's the traditional way of working, isn't it? So it's that being able to challenge and question and say, now come on, should we still be doing this? And that's the way that we do. Yep. Anything? Yeah, go for it.
I was really interested on a separate point, but interested in this digital maturity rather than digital transformation, and I think that would really help in speaking with people about it. So it's certainly something I'm going to use elsewhere. Also, what you're saying about this sort of tipping point that we're at now about digital take-up, and it seems that every training session almost that's been offered now is about digital tools. Now, my consultancy deals with the traditional way of doing comms, which is speaking to people. And I wonder how we maintain that proper relationship. As digital becomes more and more important and more used, how do we ensure that we don't throw the baby out of the bathwater, and we ensure that our oral communications keep up with the digital strategy? Because I think that tipping point could happen, and we need to ensure that we keep both going.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the kind of term face-to-face is bandied about a lot, and actually a lot of the stuff that people are doing with digital is face-to-face. So things like Add Action now have a really simple live chat functionality on their site. They launched it in the first 3 weeks, they had 1,600 interventions. So this is not a live chat of where is the nearest Add Action office or some other kind of really low-level signpost. These are trained counsellors speaking to people in the over 50s age bracket who have got severe drinking issues, who are providing one-to-one interventions. A demographic who do not go to face-to-face services will never turn up at an Add Action support group. So for me, I think the danger is we kind of close off digital because we go face-to-face happens over here in a project where 12 people can turn up in a room, and digital's not face-to-face, when in reality that group of people wouldn't go to that project, and actually now they're getting face-to-face support online. And actually the way people live their lives, the idea that you have to traipse to somewhere across the other end of a city to sit for an hour with a bunch of strangers, when actually what might happen is you might speak to a trained counsellor in 15-minute slots over a 2-week period, and that might fit into your life much more effectively. So I think there's a danger that we kind of close off digital because we say it's not face-to-face and we say it's not human, when actually a lot of the time used well it is. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Pretty much what Ross said. I think the key is not to get too wrapped up in the technology. You had a slide right at the start, Ross, which was all about digital is the enabler, it's not the reason for doing it. And that's very much, I think, you've got to be careful because I always call it the magpie syndrome. You get tied up with a big, bright, shiny new thing, and it looks amazing, and oh, that would be the silver bullet that will cure all ills, and that's great. So you just do that. But actually, what you've got to understand is what is it you're trying to achieve, and what is the outcome. And for you guys, it's very much about the service user. It's about who are you delivering a service to, and how is that going to enable you to either do it better, do it more efficiently, do it in a way that they want. So is it in a medium that they're actually going to engage with? And or can you use it to free up the time to do more of the face-to-face conversation stuff? So again, going back to Turner's point, one of the things that we're spending time actually exercising my brain at the moment is what technologies are out there that can take some of the really boring, mundane, heavy lifting tasks off the team to give them more time out in the field, to give them more face-to-face time, to do the human thing that I was talking about earlier. Humans are great at empathy and interacting with each other and understanding each other, and it's better to do that face-to-face, whether it's via a screen or whether it's in person, than any machine can ever be at this point in time. The worry is as and when and if they get to that point. But right now, being human is about being able to interact on a human level. And so if you can free up people with technology, because the technology will get rid of all the data entry or the processing the transaction or crunching numbers, whatever that might be, deploy them to go and do the service, use them for what they're really good at. And I think the key to success is understanding what you as an individual as an organisation can do in that way, and how technology allows you to do more of it.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that keeping that human element. What's really interesting if you look at all the advice about how to do a good vlog, most of it is done what you've said there, Ross, that's siloing, and it's about what platform you use, what camera you use, what angle. Very little of the advice is how you speak, how you engage with the camera and everything. So you're absolutely right. You need to keep encouraged to hear what you're saying and keep that communication between your disciplines.
From an organisational level, I think there is going to be a challenge with the younger members of the workforce coming in who are less comfortable having face-to-face conversations. So we're struggling a little bit to find really good junior digital producers, account managers to come in who are comfortable spending an hour and a half with a client in a room having a conversation. And that's quite a way. I'm over-exaggerating, but we are genuinely, we've had 30 odd applications through, and pretty much phone interviewed all of them. There are very few that are comfortable talking on the phone, and even fewer that are comfortable sitting in a room having a conversation. And not having a rough interview, none of your apprentice-style interviews, just, how are you, and what did you get up to today, and what do you do in your spare time? They struggle with that.
I must admit,
that's a worry, isn't it?
That's
the next generation of workers coming through.
Yeah, interesting that Robert's interested.
Yeah.
I think they're looking at that, how they empower the scholars that they work with.
Yeah.
I don't think Robert's interested in. And that very core skill, which really interesting you mentioned that.
And you look at higher education, we've done a lot of work with a number of universities, and they are increasingly moving tutorials away from in a room as a group of people, and increasingly moving it online, either through Skype or some form of video conferencing. And that's great if that's the medium you want to choose, but there's still an awful lot to be said for students getting in a room and having a right old ding-dong debate about something. And I don't think you can do that other than in a room surrounded by people, and building up that relationship with your tutorial cohort and understanding that these guys have this particular perspective and these guys haven't. So, and how do we argue that through, for example? And that's a big challenge of that, and they're doing it from a purely cost-efficient point of view, and because it means they can then sell their courses overseas and get, Kenyans and Chinese whatever to dial in and spend an awful lot of money doing it because it keeps the coffers full. So there's some really interesting dynamics going on.
it's definitely back to that thing as you about what's the purpose, what is it you want to get out of it?
Why?
And as you,
Well, that very first, why?
Why?
Why are we doing this?
and as you're saying, the face-to-face it still happens. It's so you can't have it without the face-to-face. And the thing about using different tech, I'm very lucky with the job that I have. I get a Surface, I get all the tech that I need, and I also have a mobile phone. I'm not sure right now where my mobile phone is, don't tell you. Because it's not the way that I communicate with most people. So I get a lot of emails or I get Slack messages, or people will say, I'll do face-to-face meetings with people. And the telephone for me is now almost redundant. And then when I find it and I go, I've got 9 voicemails, I think, well, who's phoned me? I don't actually know, well, who's likely to have phoned me? So it's that kind of way about just that different way that we're working. And having a telephone conversation for me is like, oh, it's a bit of a shock. It's like, oh, I don't have a landline in the house. My husband and I have just got mobiles. So we don't have a landline, a telephone landline in our house. And that was a decision that we made about 2 months ago, just to get rid of it, because the only time it rang, it was his mother. And
is that the reason you got rid of it?
Well, that wasn't the reason. Well, I'm not sure for him, but certainly that wasn't the reason. Don't say that. That was grammatically incorrect. Let me rephrase that. But that's certainly, she, 82, has her own mobile phone and sends text messages, so she will text him. So there's no reason for her to be using the landline. And we were paying extra for it, so we got rid of it. And this is what's happening, definitely, as you're saying, that where we're having the conversations and how we're having them, that doesn't take away from the fact that it is still communication. We still have to, yep.
Do you think it's very important to have that interaction? Because, I mean, an example is my daughter, the 2 friends, I'll say hello to them, and I notice they're not even looking at me. And it does feel that those personal skills, those soft skills, seem to be lost because everything is technology-based. You're looking away, you're looking at a piece of technology. Morning, wake up in the morning, you grab your tag, you check it, go to sleep, having checked your tag, and I explained to my daughter that social interaction is so much more important than that. Accessing information online is all well and good, but sometimes you can't interrogate that information. You ask a question, a direct answer, and it's a specific answer. You can't nuance it. You can't get a perspective. You can't get an idea of where you're coming from. Human interaction, which was mentioned by the lady behind me, that human interaction is invaluable. And with deaf people who don't have access to the technologies that we mentioned and want to join in the online revolution, but if it's audio, that's another barrier. If it's not subtitled, or it's not put into sign language. Often when deaf people ask this resource, can you put this into something? Can you put a sign language translation of this? But there's always budgetary constraints that usually always seems to be excused. So digital is a great thing, but it is a transformation, but it seems to be destroying a few things as well. So we do need to be conscious of that.
My response would be, is it destroying or is it just changing? Is that part of it? Is that the way that we're moving forward? Is it, my niece spends an awful lot of time on her iPad Snapchatting her mates, and my big sister was worried about it, and I said, well, as soon as I came in from school, I would phone my friend that I'd seen 10 minutes ago and spend 20 minutes on the telephone to her, so she's just doing what I did, but in a different way. So it is that way about thinking about different things. And again, this is probably like a glass of wine philosophical debate that we're now having. So I think we've probably gone slightly off topic. But it is that idea that this is, again, a lot of the stuff that the 3 of us are talking about is to remember that it is humans that are at the heart of this, and it is people that we're talking about. And the best digital tool in the world could be absolutely fantastic, but if it doesn't help anything that we're attempting to achieve, then it's pointless. And that is about the communicating with the people that we work with, communicating with each other and communicating with our senior leaders and getting that message across. So,
one of the industry conundrums that we always come across is in order to drive digital change, you invariably need to get your staff at all levels to work beyond their traditional job role, their level of authority. And that requires a whole range of soft skills that most people are not trained to do, but would do traditionally, habitually. That ability to persuade and influence, to have a conversation and bring somebody around your way of thinking. The very inception of the technology that we're now trying to bring in is actually removing that skill set from those joining the workforce, and yet that's the very skill set we need in order to drive the technology that's removing that skill set, if that makes sense. So it's a really interesting conundrum. And that whole kind of lead beyond authority piece, taking that initiative beyond your day job. If you are not the manager of the people that you're trying to get to do stuff, you can't go in and say, I have decided as your boss we're going to do this today. You've got to go in and persuade them and influence those people who you have no direct control over, this is the way to go. And that's a very specific set of skills that most people don't have access to or have permission to use if they've got them. It's really interesting.
I'm going to stop the conversation there because I'm now aware of the time. At last thoughts from either yourselves in the audience or either of our two speakers, last words of wisdom? Surely you must have some, come on.
Every journey starts with one step. All the time. It's a cliche for a reason.
With the word digital not there at all. We love it.
It can look really, really scary. The reality is you've just got to always use up and get amongst it. And actually when you break it down into little bite-sized chunks, it's not that bad. It really isn't. As long as you're focused on the right reasons for doing it and you've asked why a lot.
Yeah, maybe starting with something where your staff team can see a real tangible result for them really quickly as well. That, you know, don't start by, you know, making them enter data into some new CRM that they all hate, or taking away Outlook that they all use as a crutch and then giving them some new system just because it saved you some cash. So what's the big thing that's an advantage for them? Get that buy-in from the outside.
Anything from yourselves in the audience? Any last words of wisdom, thoughts, light bulbs?
The book, Sarah Richards.
Yeah, I'll bring it up actually. There we go. It's just so that everyone can see. I say I'm about to do that, and then I realised I can only look at it here, right there. Oh man, my hands are not dexterous enough to do this. Right, give me a second. There it is. Other places are available that pay tax. Yeah, it's really simple, dead easy to understand.
Thank you. I'm going to bring it to a close. Thank you very much for your time and for listening and for coping with the band, the rock band who were rehearsing. It's very kind of you. Thank you. As I say, we've got a meet-up, the next thing happening in March. I will get some information. I will decide on when that's going to happen and get that out there as well. I'll get presentations sent round too. It is Joe's second last week as our team support, so if you've not received those presentations in 2 weeks, that'll be because of my terrible administrational skills. So please do send an email to One Digital saying, where are those presentations? You've not sent them round. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a point where that noise was going on. I was thinking, why haven't I
No, I don't know what to do. Thank you both.
Product Forge.
Product Forge.
Product Forge.
It's a hackathon with a twist.
Yes.
Events like this are a superb way of extracting fantastic ideas from people with imagination, combining them with people who are doers and can make those ideas happen.
This is about finding the next step of innovation, moving into a digital age.
We just wanted to hear what other people could come up with and to help us think about how we do things in a different way.
I've come here to network and hopefully build something really, really cool.
For me, it's when you realise you've got ownership of a project where you realise it excites you.
We're really excited about the kind of ideas that people who are not maybe typically users or maybe not professionals will come up for us.
I didn't really know what to expect. There's competition, but it's friendly competition. I like the 3-day format, so being able to generate ideas, actually build up a prototype and then do a pitch. It's more than just technology. It's actually like, well, let's try and create something that could potentially be trialled and then go on and have a life after the event. I think is brilliant.
It's a brilliant experience. I'd recommend anyone to get involved, no matter what your skill level, what your skill set, there is something for everybody.